Right.
All right, let me get things started.
Let's do
So,
it.
today we have a very interesting episode for you guys. We're going to get things started with the conflict in the South China Sea. So, Dave, bring us in.
It's an area, I'll throw up a map for you guys, that surrounds China. It's right off the Pacific with Taiwan and the Philippines in it. And a third of all global trade passes through this region. Basically, a lot of goods that are going from Shanghai to the US over the Pacific, a lot of goods within Asia. Since 1970, China pulled up one of their older world maps.
Right.
And they said that we control some of this territory.
The 9-dash map.
Exactly.
We could throw that up for comparison.
We could.
Sloppily drawn.
So,
Let's just say that.
your dashes.
Yeah.
And then basically, slowly but surely, they started putting up another at almost 30 outposts in the South China Sea. And these are becoming an increasing problem for the United States.
Right. So the outposts, are essentially Navy bases that they're building on these artificial islands to kind of enforce their dominance and show that they're the ones truly in possession of the territory. And the way that essentially this is supposed to go is countries are supposed to have these exclusive economic zones that go on in up to 200 miles off their shore. So essentially all of the little islands that are being in dispute based off of China's map, they belong to a variety of different countries: Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and a lot of these countries are also part of the ASEAN, basically alliance of Asian countries in the Southeast Asia Sea, the South China Sea. And the thing is, China does not want to abide by these rules. Like you said, they want to abide by their old 9-dash map, and this is causing a lot of problems because there are fishermen from other countries like Malaysia, Philippines.
And nobody recognizes it but China.
Exactly. And they want to use this this water to fish and bring back food for their family and to stimulate the economy of these countries, but China isn't letting it happen. Well, it is a big problem.
And what's interesting is that Xi Jinping actually came to America and he gave a statement in 2015 that promised that they would not militarize these islands, these outposts. And what do you know, a few years later, you see satellite images, they're building airplane hangars, they're putting up missiles. So these are military outposts, and they're very, very strategically placed. And this is the source of the conflict. What is the conflict in the South China Sea? In a nutshell, it's that China is militarizing certain islands that don't really belong to them, and they're bullying other countries out of that area. And this actually, it's interesting, politically, this forces those smaller countries to ally with America.
Right. So, but here's the problem. So these other countries that are part of ASEAN, a lot of them are actually a little bit nervous to stand up to China and actually fight for the land, because nobody really wants those disputes and to deal with those problems, besides for the 5 or so countries. So in the alliance, there are 10 countries. Around 5 of them are actually affected by this. And the idea initially was for them to all come together. And I believe it was by 2022, they wanted to have an official code of conduct for how to handle the situation. But the problem is it's moving really slowly because A, China is throwing up barriers and roadblocks for them, and B, it's difficult to get everybody on board to criticize China and step into that fight.
Was this an alliance that was created because of this issue, or was it?
No, it was before that. I kind of see it almost as NATO, but without the military aspect. The point of it is just for economic and political alliances. So that all of these countries can support each other.
And I know some countries within that alliance, for example, the Philippines, have a mutual military relationship with America, meaning if one of them, one entity is attacked.
I did see an interview with an American general who was basically saying if China wants problems with Philippines, it's going to be a problem with the U.S. as well.
But I think the much larger problem, and this is what really is going to affect the rest of the world. The South China Sea is the South China Sea. Those are those disputes. Taiwan is one of the countries within the South China Sea.
Right.
Taiwan houses, and crucial to the entire world, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
And that's a big deal.
It's insane. They manufacture 92% of all advanced chips in the world.
Huge monopoly on that, by the way. Other 8% is Samsung.
Exactly.
So think about this. Samsung, which we all view as a huge juggernaut in this space, 92% of their business in that area is going to TSMC.
And just a bit of history before we bring it back to today. The way that TSMC was started, it was started by Morris Chang around 1970. And what allowed them to sort of prosper through a lot of economic recessions, a lot of droughts, was they were highly subsidized by the government. So
Taiwan government.
By the Taiwanese government, correct. So this meant that they were allowed to attract talent and keep these jobs and keep innovating even during a recession or some sort of other economic instability. Because as these chips were being developed, there's this concept known as Moore's Law, which basically meant that every 2 years, the amount of transistors on a chip would double. So processing power would double. And the fact that basically meant that things moved very quickly. So TSMC would not have existed without the sort of subsidization from the Taiwanese government. And the reason that, I mean, you think, which companies are dependent on them nowadays?
Nowadays, a lot of it is Apple, Intel, Qualcomm, AMD, NVIDIA, Tesla.
Exactly.
And the thing is, it's not just these companies. You find these semiconductors in iPhones, smart doorbells, computers, cars, even F-35 fighter jets. This is a huge part of the modern world.
And the reason that this happened to me, I mean, why Taiwan, an island that we don't hear about pretty much any other time except for in this context, is because when the whole chip hype started up, there was basically, they used to be produced in America. These companies were all owned and managed by physicists, right? And they were very like needle-nose pliers, screwdriver, I'm going to make this myself in America. Slowly we saw a transition as those physicists, that leadership structure, went from physicists into managers. And they wanted to optimize every part of the supply chain. So they started looking towards Taiwan. And what's sort of really proprietary about TSMC is, like you said, Samsung was 8% of the market share. What TSMC does is they don't have any sort of conflict of interest. Samsung has their own line of products. So for example, that's why even though the first iPhone did have a Samsung-made chip, that's why Apple's going to think twice before sending over this technology to Samsung, because at the end of the day, Samsung has its own product. TSMC works only as a chip fabricator.
Exactly. And TSMC, they do have a huge competitive advantage in other ways as well. Like, they truly are the best in this business. Apple actually recently got 100% of their initial 3-nanometer supply of new chips that they're making. So it's clear that Apple recognizes the improved performance, better power efficiency that are made. And these chips are made with super high level of precision. I was seeing even if a little speck of dust was to get on them in the production process, it could ruin the entire batch. They wouldn't even, be able to produce it.
Exactly. And I mean, the reason that these chips are so advanced is because they use machines from a Dutch company called ASML. They're extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. And like you said, down to the speck of dust, these chips are so small. The way that they're carved, the way the transistors are carved into them, are just through really high precision light. And that's what, the fact that this is a Dutch company, those machines are insanely expensive, I think from somewhere 100 to 200 million. TSMC purchases those machines, ASML sends over employees to manage them. And that's the issue with the supply chain. And we saw this hit during COVID. Basically what happened is you have companies in completely different hemispheres relying on one another. So for example, TSMC relies on American innovation, right? In order to actually create these chips. Apple is creating the chips, sending the design plans. TSMC has the equipment to manufacture it.
Right.
But the reason, I guess, coming back to the issue with Taiwan, why this is so crucial, is because if the South China Sea becomes more militarized, right, there's less access to Taiwan. That's an issue for America.
Absolutely.
But there is some hope for America in the form of the Arizona plant now.
Exactly. So the Arizona plant, I think it can also be seen as a move by TSMC to get America to rally behind them if something were to happen, because now it's in America's interests for everything to be all clear there.
Exactly. And I think that at the end of the day, such an advanced plan as TSMC, it's not enough to take it over by force. There's still, the people who are loyal to their country, there's still a lot of talent there. There's engineers that work there. So China can't exactly just sit over TSMC and say, you're going to manufacture our chips, even if they do take over. And I think how much are they investing into the American factory?
I think it was 92 billion.
I mean, an insane amount, but it's
close to 100 billion.
Yeah, it's the first factory in America. And even going back to the debt ceiling that we discussed, there's questions about if America can subsidize this factory and with their taxes, because we did cut back spending. And now there's questions about whether or not the CHIPS Act is going to be able to support the new factory.
Right. That, I do think that we should definitely get that done. That would be silly to miss out on an opportunity like this, but it's interesting. It's not just in America that this is happening. They're also working on producing a factory in Germany, and they're investing in there as well. So they really are trying to get as many allies as they can.
Exactly. Germany, and they're also in talks for Japan.
Right.
For Japan. And what's interesting is that, remember I mentioned the original founder, Morris Chang? He doesn't support opening up a factory in America. Even like aside from any sort of political.
Just the business side of things.
Exactly, because he tried it. He tried to open up a plant in Washington in 1990, and he said there was a culture clash.
I think he actually studied in America as well.
Yes, yeah, he did, and he was offered different jobs in America. He ended up in Taiwan.
Right.
High costs and lack of labor. That's what he found in Washington. I think the plant is still there. But what's interesting is that in Arizona, the plant that they're opening is right next to Intel.
Right.
So now there's a huge community in Phoenix, and I think we're going to see there's going to be a huge growth in jobs. Exactly.
Right. And connecting this back to what's going on with the conflict with China, I know we had talked about the EUV lithography machines that ASML produces that makes things easier for TSMC. I'll just read out something that I found in an article from Seeking Alpha today. So current policy from the US has actually made it impossible for China to buy those lithography machines. And the US is even encouraging Netherlands to tighten export controls so that the next lower level of machines that they call deep UV are also denied from Chinese companies. And these export restrictions basically wiped out. There was a Chinese company, Huawei, I think it's called. They produce smartphones. Huawei, maybe, yeah. So that's basically wiping out their smartphone exporting business because they don't have access to that technology. And since they can't get access or get their hands on these new leading edge semiconductors and they can't manufacture it on their own, there's concerns that China might try to level the playing field by destroying basically Taiwan's infrastructure. And that's how they would try to set things straight.
And that's the concern.
A big concern, right?
And I heard America even saying that they would rather just get rid of TSMC than to let China have it.
I think I saw somewhere TSMC was obviously not happy with this, but America basically said if China invaded Taiwan, they might bomb TSMC.
It's insane. I mean,
like a congressman hinted at it.
Yeah. And all of this has been happening recently and a lot under the radar, I guess, because of a lot of other things that are going on. I don't think we realize how prominent these microchips are in our life.
Right. Even everywhere around us, we see them.
Computers, cars have multiple transistors in them. I mean, the microphones that we're using, the cameras, everything. But here's what I want your opinion on. China, as we know, has a vastly larger population than America.
Right.
Why do you think TSMC decided to move to America as opposed to China? Because they said it supposedly because of consumer demand in America. But consumer demand is higher in China.
Well, I think it might have to do with those export restrictions that I was talking about right here, where basically it would be very hard to actually get your hands on the machines and actually produce everything you need in China because of that chip war that we were mentioning between America and China, where America is placing the export controls.
But okay.
Probably into 40 bucks.
Okay, but listen, I think moving forward, I think that if TSMC is able to establish this relationship with America, they started building in 2020, right? Actually, during Trump's presidency,
right?
They established this relationship because a lot of countries are scrambling to sort of domesticate their production, as we saw what happened during COVID when supply chains collapsed. As they become more intricate, they're also more prone to failure, as a mentor of ours taught us.
Exactly, global systemic risk.
Exactly.
You could call it.
But I think the thing is, once they open up, it's going to be important to see how the different cultures mesh. A lot of people are talking about how Taiwanese workers have different methodologies, I guess, than American workers in the workplace, how they work, how loyal they are to the company.
Yeah, I could see that. But it's also, a lot of this is now automated, isn't it? Just with robotic arms taking care of a big part of this process.
The production itself, but actually innovating. And this is the reason that we, like you said, TSMC as a monopoly in the beginning you mentioned. This is the reason there aren't a lot of companies that can actually break into this space. It advances so quickly that by the time a company actually comes up with a process to create we're up to 5 nanometer coming into 3 nanometer chips.
Right.
By the time a company even comes up with that, the companies that are already in the field are already leagues ahead. There was a company called Global Foundries that wasn't able to make it. Interesting story actually. So when this all started, 2 Americans were sent into the Soviet Union, and the Soviets tried to replicate what the Americans are doing with chips. What happened was, instead of creating their own chips, instead of innovating in their own way, what they did was, they started copying American chips. But by the time you copy one chip, there's
already 10 more ahead.
Exactly. So I think that's an issue. And the majority of companies who are TSMC's customers? They're American companies. Intel's chips, America's chips.
Tesla.
Exactly. And even when you see on Apple products, it says designed in California, assembled in China. But the components are mostly made in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
The chip in my computer, the chip in my phone, the chip in your phone, and even the chip in your computer,
Right.
can only be made in Taiwan. That's pretty much the only place with enough advanced technology to produce this. If we bring that into America, if we develop this relationship with TSMC, moving forward, that's going to be insane. That's going to be very good for America.
Right, and that'll give them the chance to have our best minds, working on this and innovating even further themselves.
Exactly. And I think that we're going to see, I mean, this is like in the macro view, we're going to see a shift back from, there was sort of a globalizing moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with political tension, there's I want to say a localization of things or a domestication. So we used to have the talent in America, machines made in the Netherlands, and production in Taiwan. Now it's all coming back together.
America, full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big deal, obviously, for years to come now. We've talked about the AI revolution. We've talked about Apple's new moves adopting the 3-nanometer technology into basically all of their future products, all of the iPhone 15 models, and even the MacBooks as well. So we know that this technology is going to be here to stay. It's going to keep getting better. We're going to be able to keep innovating using it. All that we can do is hope that this tension, at some point gets resolved and China backs off eventually.
And another big thing we didn't address is this technology is not just vital to consumer products. It's extremely fundamental in terms of defense, right? Because we don't realize, for example, fighter jets, tanks, missiles, they also use microchips for guidance. I remember during the Vietnam War, there was this one bridge, specifically one bridge that they couldn't take down. I'll find the name and put it up. As soon as they started implementing chips into guidance systems and missiles, they took the bridge down. Hundreds of missiles missed it, and they took down that one bridge. So whoever has TSMC on lock, whoever has their machines, their production capabilities, effectively is the country with the upper hand if it were to come to
that kind of standard.
Warfare. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And China, a lot of their technology is pretty dated, similar to Soviets.
Yeah.
But now, and as we talked about, it's going to be hard for them to even get their hands on any semiconductors, let alone TSMC. So definitely the U.S. would have a big upper hand, especially with the new factory in Arizona.
Exactly. So
let's wrap up.
All
right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope that everybody learned something new today. It was a lot of fun researching this and looking into how things are going to turn out now and even in the future. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll have more content for you soon. Also, we should mention, this is most likely our last episode
in the school building.
Yeah, in the studio. We will have a new setting for you, something more exciting.
We'll keep you guys posted. We don't want to spoil anything.
We don't, exactly.
But just stay tuned. Big moves coming up.
Big moves, big guests, some big new topics. And thank you for staying with us.
See you, everybody.
Over.